Our understanding of amino acids and proteins really starts with physical chemists in the early 1800s. And these people studied the constituents of living matter. And you have to remember that in the early 1800s, the distinction between elements and compounds was kind of fuzzy, and the concepts of chemical bonding were really in their infancy. I'd remind you that Kekule didn't come up with the cyclic structure of aromatic rings until 1857. But the rage back then, the thing that everybody wanted to do, was elemental analysis, right? You could take whatever stuff you had, and as people were learning about atoms, you could basically put it in a crucible and heat it till it was ash, and you could measure the residue. How much carbon was there, how much hydrogen was there, how much nitrogen was there, and people did this with everything. Tea, coffee, whatever you could find. You could figure out the composition of what it was. Okay? Now, in 1789, before that, there was a French chemist named Fourcroy, and he had identified that from animal sources you could purify three substances that seemed to be related to each other. Today we would call them proteins. They didn't call them that at the time, right? But what he purified were really three animal sources of material. And he called them albumin, fibrin, and gelatin. Okay? And albumin was just a term. Albumin was stuff you got from egg white. It was stuff you could get out of plasma, of blood. Fibrin was the stuff that you got if you let blood clot. Gelatin was the stuff you got if you boiled bones. Right? These were just classes of molecules. Okay? And these were, of course, then great targets for quantitative analysis. And the next big insight came from this guy, Dr. George Muller. So he was a Dutch physician who became a chemist, and he focused on trying to understand what it was that was in albumins, egg albumin, serum albumin, wheat albumin. What was it that was in this stuff? And so he did elemental analysis, and I'm showing you the results of what he got here. And the results were absolutely incredible. It looked like if you took fibrin or egg albumin or serum albumin or wheat albumin, which I'm not showing you, they had the exact composition of carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen and oxygen and phosphorus and maybe a little difference in the sulfur. Okay? But everything else was exactly the same. The elemental composition was exactly the same. Okay? 4 different substances, identical in composition. The conclusions were obvious and inescapable. All of these materials in living things must be made of the same thing. They were all made of one substance, which he called grundstuff. Ground substance. Grundstuff. And of course, as you know, if you know the composition, you can write the chemical formula for what this magic grundstuff was. And the chemical formula for this turned out to be 400 atoms of carbon, 620 molecules of hydrogen, 100 molecules of nitrogen, 120 molecules of oxygen, 1 molecule of phosphorus, and either 1 or 2 molecules of sulfur. Okay? And in fact, he then speculated that what must happen, since this was present in plant material and human material and animal material and egg white, it's obvious what must be happening. Proteins must all come from plants, and they must be assimilated whole. When you eat a plant, that grun stuff in the plant becomes the grun stuff in you. Now we laugh at this, ha, 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 ha. But in fact, if you think through it logically, isn't that the logical conclusion you would come to? How many of the things that we think we understand in today's world are the same as this misunderstanding about grun stuff? But for many years, this was the idea. And this magic thing, right? In fact, what he wrote was, he said, quote, "I hold it as now established that the main mass of animal matter is delivered directly from the plant kingdom, and that fibrin and albumin, except for 1 atom of sulfur, have the same composition. The vegetable albumin was synthesized from grain, and the animal albumin was basically the absorption of the entire protein. Incredible. What are we going to call this magic substance from which we are all composed? It needs a special name because it's what we're made of, right? And so we will give this a special name, a Greek name. We will call this magic stuff proteose. Okay? Proteose. Which we now call protein.